Want to welcome you wherever you are at this moment to our Maundy Thursday service. Good to have you with us. The word Maundy comes from the Latin word mandatum, which simply means command. On the night of Jesus' Last Supper with his 12 disciples, which we mark this evening, Jesus said, "I give you a new command, a new mandatum. As I have loved you, so you must love one another." John 13:34.
Kabilule, wa okulu, Tenau kishmi, Dilukomi hiv. Kabilu, steu, Tenademi, De breitha chadatha, Di hivlekom wathrabim di mashle chatayin. Havata rabata vanash, Yavech eochi lehom. Ai, la, Kautum lemhakti en hasel tomma. Vila thil komara hem haki hita. Hitha hivo denale dena. Kokavel dena a veif lekom. En toen. Hivo lekom.
I danced in the morning when the world was begun, and I danced in the moon and the stars and the sun, and I came down from heaven and I danced on the earth. At Bethlehem I had my birth. Dance, then, wherever you may be. I am the Lord of the dance, said he, and I'll lead you all wherever you may be, and I'll lead you all in the dance, said he. I danced for the scribe and the Pharisee, but they would not dance and they would not follow me. I danced for the fishermen, for James and John. They came to me and the dance went on. Dance then, wherever you may be. I am the Lord of the dance, said he, and I'll lead you all wherever you may be, and I'll lead you all in the dance, said he. I danced on the Sabbath and I cured the lame. The holy people said it was a shame. They whipped and they stripped and they hung me high, and they left me there on a cross to die. Dance then, wherever you may be. I am the Lord of the dance, said he, and I'll lead you all wherever you may be, and I'll lead you all in the dance, said he. I danced on a Friday and the sky turned black. It's hard to dance with the devil on your back. They buried my body and they thought I'd gone, but I am the dance and I still go on. Dance then, wherever you may be. I am the Lord of the dance, said he, and I'll lead you all wherever
Down the Via Dolorosa in Jerusalem that day, the soldiers tried to clear the narrow street, but the crowd pressed in to see the man condemned to die on Calvary. He was bleeding from a beating. There were stripes upon his back, and he wore a crown of thorns upon his head. And he bore with every step the scorn of those who cried out for his death. Down the Via Dolorosa, all the way of suffering, like a lamb in the Messiah, Christ the King. But he chose to walk that road out of his love for you and me. Down the Via Dolorosa, all the way to Calvary. Por la Via Dolorosa, triste en Jerusalem, los soldados le abrían paso a Jesús, mas la gente se acercaba para ver que lavaba cruz. Down the Via Dolorosa, all the way of suffering, like a lamb came the Messiah, Christ the King. But he chose to walk that road, his love for ti, for me. Por la Via Dolorosa, all the way to Calvary. The blood that would cleanse the souls of all men made its way through the heart of Jerusalem. Down the Via Dolorosa, all the way of suffering, like a lamb in the Messiah, Christ the King. But he chose to walk that road out of his love for you and me. Down the Via Dolorosa, all the way to Calvary. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life.
My Lord has garments so wondrous fine, and myrrh their texture fits. Its fragrance reach to this heart of mine. With joy my being thrills. Out of the ivory palaces into a world of woe. Only his great eternal love made my Savior go. In garments glorious he will come to open wide the door, and I shall enter my heavenly home to dwell forevermore. Out of the ivory palaces into a world of woe. Only his great eternal love made my Savior go.
Little Tommy liked church except for one thing: the pastor's excruciatingly long prayers. He was naturally apprehensive when he heard that the pastor was coming to his family's home for dinner, and the pastor was asked to do the blessing. But he prayed a very short word of thanks, and the boy said, "Well, you don't pray so long when you're hungry." A meal, it's universal. It's social. It's a gathering of friends or family, something we are missing so much at this time. It can be a setting for celebration. It can be a means of grieving. At its most basic core, a meal meets a hunger. The Passover meal is the beginning of Israel's national year, Exodus 12. And at the Passover meal that Jesus shared on that Maundy Thursday, he inaugurated a new beginning of a new kingdom for all who hunger spiritually. That night, Jesus observed all that was required for a Passover meal. It had to be spent within the walled city of Jerusalem. For his final night, therefore, Jesus chose Gethsemane inside Greater Jerusalem, Matthew 26:18. Go into the city. This was instead of his favored location of Bethany, where Mary and Martha and Lazarus lived, which was outside the city. Jesus and his disciples that night reclined as they ate. It was customary to sit at an ordinary meal, but to recline at Passover. And Passover always included an explanation of why this night was unlike any other. And Jesus included an explanation why they were about to experience that night something they would never experience again. And the Passover meal ended with a hymn, so too the Last Supper that Jesus shared. Alongside the roasted lamb, bitter herbs, fruit puree, and salt water, all highly symbolic of the Israelite slavery experience, the Passover contained two key standout moments: bread and wine. One baker did a great favor for a friend, and he said, "Thank you, I really appreciate it." The baker said, "No problem, it's the yeast I could dough." Panera Bread bakes over 16 different types of bread: whole grain, rye, ciabatta, sourdough, asiago. Did you know that the word Panera means bread basket, which makes Panera Bread bread basket bread? Passover bread was unleavened bread. It was unbaked bread. It was a reminder of how on that first Passover night there was no time to bake the bread for the Hebrews. Such was the swiftness of God's deliverance from Egypt. Jesus declared, "I am the bread of life." It speaks to bread's commonality, universality. daily bread. Jesus was offering his body, symbolized by bread, that meets humankind's deepest, longest hunger. And the wine, the symbol of blood. During the Passover meal, there were 4 different cups of wine which were consumed. The third cup, known as the cup of blessing or cup of redemption, stood for more than the Hebrews' escape from slavery and the promise of a new land. It stood for the plans and purposes of God for all ages. From this cup, Jesus drank. This cup, Jesus adopted as a memorial drink for us, for Christian communion. Over this cup, Jesus uses a new redemption language, Luke 22:20. Have you ever been in a church service where you're not quite concentrating on what the pastor is saying, not quite listening? Maybe that was the case for the disciples during that Passover meal. They'd commemorated this type of meal for many years, but suddenly they leaned in, suddenly they focused, because they were hearing words from Jesus that they'd not heard before. What did he say? What page are we on? They nudged each other. The fourth and final cup of Passover was called the cup of consummation, a reminder of God's promise to take his people, to unite with them in the promised land. Some believe that Jesus left this fourth cup alone, sitting on the table, saying, "I tell you, I will not drink again of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it anew with you in my Father's kingdom." Matthew 26:29. He refrains from drinking the cup of reunion until that time we are all with him. Jesus poured out his blood for a new covenant. 8-year-old Joey took violin lessons. He had a dream. He dreamt that one day he would play in an orchestra, playing the violin at Carnegie Hall. He would practice. He would scrape dismally back and forth every night, always accompanied by the family dog with its pitiful howling and wailing. The older sister couldn't take it any longer. "For goodness sake, Joey, can't you play something the dog doesn't know?" As a child, did you dream of becoming something, of doing something? Perhaps there's nothing worse than when we stop dreaming. On Maundy Thursday, the disciples began to let the words sink in that Jesus was speaking of his death, that Jesus was speaking of the cross. Less than 3 years before, they'd returned from a tour of duty, accompanied with joy and reports of demons fleeing and the lame being healed. But now, the dreams of something bigger and greater were coming to an end. In the dark shadows of that upper room, filled with words of foreboding, the dream dies. Hans Bablinger from Ulm in Germany had a dream. He dreamt of flying. He wanted to soar like a bird. The only problem was that he lived in the 16th century. What he wanted was impossible. But with time, he used his skills to construct a set of wings, tested up in the foothills of the Bavarian Alps. It was a good choice. It was a lucky choice. The up currents are common in that region. On a memorable day, with a handful of friends watching and the sun shining, he jumped off a high embankment and soared safely down. Word got around, and soon the king and the bishop and all of Ulm came to see Hans fly. Hans consented. There was one change, however. Since the crowd would be large and the hills difficult to climb, Hans would have to choose a place in the lowlands. He chose the bluffs near Danube. They were broad and flat, and the river was a good distance below. It was a poor choice. It was the wrong choice. The updraft in the hills was non-existent near the river, and so in front of the king, the bishop, the whole court, the entire village, he jumped and fell like a rock straight into the river. The king was disappointed, and the bishop preached the next Sunday that man was not meant to fly. Hans Bablinger believed him. Imprisoned by the pulpit, he put away his wings and never again tried to fly. He died soon after, his dreams with him. Can anyone say they have not felt at some point in their life the crushing weight of dreams broken? A mother or father left with the full responsibility of bringing up a child after some kind of loss. The one who is suddenly taken ill that changes their whole quality of life. A pandemic that leaves a man or a woman suddenly unemployed with no hope of income or job. Even churches can put an end to people's dreams. Max Lucado observes the cathedral in 16th century Ulm was not the last to ground a flyer, a dreamer. We've been quite proficient at saying what we can't do from the pulpit, rather than what we can. And what of the church of Ulm today? It's empty. Most of the visitors that do come by are tourists. And how do most of those tourists get to Ulm, Germany? They fly. Broken dreams, broken promises, a broken spirit. Yet every Sunday, every week, in every nation, in every town, you will hear somewhere, you will read, you will be familiar with these words of the Last Supper of Maundy Thursday. He took the bread, and when he had given thanks, he blessed and he broke. He gave so that we might live. He was broken so that you might be restored. In life, there are times, there are seasons, even now, when you feel broken. Yet he took, he broke, so that we might be whole. Amen.
Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble.